What if I told you that the most infamous political advisor in history, a man whose very name is a synonym for evil and deception, was actually a passionate patriot, a brilliant writer, and one of the most misunderstood figures of all time? This is not the story of a monster. This is the story of a man named Niccolò Machiavelli, a man who loved his country so much that he was willing to stare into the darkest abyss of power and report back what he saw. His ideas would be twisted, his name cursed for centuries, but his insights into the raw mechanics of power are more relevant today than ever before. So, who was the real man behind the myth? Strap in, because the true story is far more fascinating than the legend. Montage of Renaissance Florence, the Duomo, bustling markets, artistic masterpieces. Fade to a portrait of a young Machiavelli. Our story begins not in a palace of shadows, but in the vibrant, chaotic, and intellectually explosive city of Florence, Italy, in the year 1469. Niccolò was born into a family that was noble in name but not in wealth. His father was a lawyer with debts, meaning young Niccolò received an excellent classical education, but learned the value of money and the struggle of maintaining status from a young age. He grew up during the golden age of the Renaissance, surrounded by the genius of Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. But more importantly, he grew up in a city-state constantly at war with itself and its neighbors. Florence was a republic, but it was a fragile one, caught between powerful families, the influence of the church, and the looming threat of foreign superpowers like France and Spain. This was the crucible that forged Machiavelli. He wasn't just reading about history, he was living in the middle of a political hurricane. Map of Italy showing warring city-states. Footage of political intrigue in council chambers. For the first half of his life, Machiavelli was a dedicated civil servant. In 1498, at the age of 29, he was appointed as a senior official in the Florentine Republic, serving as second chancellor and secretary to the Council of Ten for War. This was his dream job. He was, essentially, Florence's diplomat and military organizer. For the next 14 years, he traveled across Italy and Europe. He met with kings, dukes, and popes. He negotiated with the cunning Cesare Borgia, a man who used ruthless and often brutal methods to carve out a kingdom for himself. Machiavelli was not an idealistic philosopher in an ivory tower, he was in the trenches of realpolitik. He saw firsthand what worked and what didn't. He witnessed conspiracies, betrayals, successful wars, and catastrophic defeats. He took meticulous notes, not of how he wished leaders would behave, but of how they actually behaved to gain and maintain power. This was the research that would one day make him famous. Dramatic reenactment of the Medici's return. Machiavelli being arrested, tortured on the rack. But in 1512, disaster struck. The powerful Medici family, who had been exiled from Florence, returned with a Spanish army and crushed the Republic. The government Machiavelli had served so loyally was overthrown overnight. He was fired from his job, and then, accused of conspiracy against the new Medici rulers, he was arrested, imprisoned, and subjected to the most brutal torture, the dreaded strappato, where he was repeatedly hoisted into the air by a rope tied to his wrists, dislocating his shoulders. He endured this agony, but maintained his innocence. Eventually, with no proof, he was released and banished to a small farm outside Florence. Imagine that. One day, you're a respected diplomat at the center of power, the next, you're a broken, disgraced, and impoverished exile. Machiavelli walking sadly to his farm, then, a shot of him at a desk at night, writing by candlelight. This was the lowest point of his life, but it was also the moment of his greatest creation. Cut off from the political world he loved, he turned to writing. In the evenings, he would put on the fine robes he used to wear as a diplomat and retreat to his study. There, by candlelight, he would commune with the ancient philosophers of Rome. And then, he began to write his masterpiece. He decided to write a book that would analyze power so effectively, so brilliantly, that the new Medici rulers would have to take notice and offer him a job again. This book was a job application, written from exile. He called it De Principatibus, or On Principalities. We know it by a different title, The Prince. The cover of The Prince appears on screen. Quick, dramatic text flashes. Is it better to be loved than feared? The ends justify the means. So, what is in this book that caused such an uproar? The Prince is a short, shockingly direct guide on how to acquire and hold on to political power. It broke completely from the traditional political writing of the time, which focused on how a ruler ought to behave based on Christian morals and ideals. Machiavelli wasn't interested in ought. He was interested in is. He looked at history and his own experience and asked, what actions actually lead to success for a ruler? The answers were terrifying to his contemporaries. He argued that a successful leader, or prince, must be pragmatic above all else. He famously wrote that it is better for a ruler to be feared than loved, if he cannot be both. Why? Because love is fickle and can be broken when it's in people's interest to do so, but fear is a constant. He said a ruler must be like both a fox and a lion, a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten away wolves. In other words, he must be cunning and strong. He argued that a leader must sometimes be prepared to act immorally, to lie, to deceive, even to be cruel, for the sake of the state's stability and survival. The most famous and misunderstood phrase associated with him is, the ends justify the means. While he never wrote that exact sentence, the idea is central to his argument, that the ultimate goal of a stable and secure state can justify actions that would be considered evil in a different context. Shocked reactions from historical figures. The Catholic Church putting The Prince on the index of forbidden books. When The Prince was published after his death, it was like a bomb going off in European thought. The Catholic Church was horrified. They placed it on the index of forbidden books. People were scandalized. They saw it as a manual for tyranny, written by the devil himself. The term, Machiavellian, was coined to describe someone who is unscrupulous, cunning, and deceptive. His name became a byword for evil. But was this a fair reading? Or did everyone miss the point? Shift to a more thoughtful tone. Show Machiavelli's other books, like The Discourses. To understand the real Machiavelli, you cannot just read The Prince. You have to read his other great work, The Discourses on Livy. This book is much longer and is a passionate defense of republican government and liberty. So, how can the same man write a guide for tyrants and a love letter to freedom? This is the central paradox of Machiavelli. Many scholars believe that Machiavelli was not a fan of tyranny at all. He was a republican at heart. They argue that The Prince was not a sincere recommendation, but a satire, a warning to people about how rulers actually behave so they could be on guard. Others believe he was simply a realist who believed that different situations required different solutions. In a corrupt and chaotic state, a strong, pragmatic ruler, a prince might be needed to establish order. But for a healthy state, a republic with citizen involvement and the rule of law was the best and most stable form of government. His ultimate goal, in both books, was a strong and united Italy, free from foreign domination. Machiavelli in his later years, looking tired. A shot of his simple grave. Machiavelli never got the job he wanted from the Medici. He lived out his days on his farm, writing plays and histories. He died in 1527, a largely forgotten and disappointed man. He had no idea that his name would echo through history, forever linked to the dark arts of power. He was buried in a simple tomb in Florence. The irony is immense. The man who gave the world the ultimate advice on gaining power died powerless. Fast-paced montage of history, Napoleon, Shakespeare, modern politicians, business leaders, movie villains like Frank Underwood. His legacy, however, was just beginning. For centuries, Machiavellian was the ultimate insult. Shakespeare called a villainous character a murderous Machiavel. But as time went on, thinkers began to see the value in his realism. He is now considered the father of modern political science because he separated politics from ethics for the sake of study, just like a scientist studies physics without judging it. His influence is everywhere. Leaders like Napoleon studied him. Founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson read him, understanding the need for checks and balances against the very kind of power Machiavelli described. In the 20th century, dictators used his ideas for evil, while democrats used his warnings for protection. Today, you can see his principles applied not just in politics, but in business strategy, corporate takeovers, and even in the scheming characters of our favorite TV shows like Game of Thrones or House of Cards. He taught us to look beyond the speeches and the promises, to the cold, hard reality of how power operates. Return to the hooded figure from the beginning. He turns, looks at the camera, and gives a slight, knowing smile before fading out. So, was Machiavelli a sinister teacher of evil or the first clear-eyed analyst of power? The answer is, he was both and neither. He was a complex man living in a violent time, who dared to describe the world as it was, not as people wished it to be. He wasn't creating a monster. He was holding up a mirror to the monsters that already existed, and in doing so, he gave us the tools to recognize them. He forces us to ask the most difficult questions about leadership, morality, and survival. Is it the duty of a leader to be good, or to be effective? Can a good man survive in a wicked world? These questions are as urgent today as they were in Renaissance Florence. If you were fascinated by the true story of this misunderstood genius, then you're in the right place. We dig deep into the lives of the most iconic and controversial figures in history, separating the myth from the man. So, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Who should we profile next? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, this is Celebrity History CHV, signing off. Keep exploring the past.